What happens when a son sells his mother's furniture, never suspecting the secrets hidden inside? Martha lost more than just old chairs, but what she discovered changed her family forever. What happened next stunned the whole town. Martha had lived in her house for over 40 years. Every corner of her home held a memory, a story embedded in the creak of the floorboards, the floral wallpaper, and, most of all, in the well-worn furniture that had survived decades of birthdays, holidays, and seasons of change. Her antique oak sideboard still bore a scratch from her son Tommy's toy truck, her velvet settee held the ghost of her late husband's laughter, and the heavy wooden chest in her bedroom had guarded her most cherished keepsakes since the day she was married. But the years hadn't been kind to Martha. After a fall left her with a broken hip, her independence shrank to the four walls of her parlor. Tommy, her only son, visited when he could, though more often than not, it was to check her mail or complain about the price of groceries. Lately, he'd become insistent that the house was too much for her. "Ma, it's time to let go. You can't take care of this place. You're just making more work for me." Martha resisted, clinging to the familiar rhythms of her home. But Tommy grew relentless, bringing realtors through the door, leaving brochures for luxury-assisted living on her kitchen table. "All that old furniture's just clutter," he said one afternoon, opening the curtains wide and surveying the parlor as if it were already empty. Despite her protests, Tommy began clearing out what he called junk. Martha watched, powerless, as he arranged for the sideboard, her favorite armchair, and the heavy chest to be listed online. He barely glanced at the framed photographs she'd set aside, brushing them off as more stuff to dust. The movers arrived 2 days later, efficient and impersonal, carrying away decades of her life with the dull thud of cardboard boxes and the scrape of wood against tile. That night, Martha sat in her now-bare living room, knees pressed together and hands shaking in her lap. Eileen, her oldest friend and neighbor, brought over tea and tried to lift her spirits. "Tommy means well, dear. Maybe he's just overwhelmed." But Martha shook her head, tears bright in her eyes. "He doesn't see what any of this means. Not to me." The next morning, Tommy returned, cheerful and businesslike. "Good news, Ma. I sold the lot to a dealer. Got more than I thought. Some folks even asked for the old chest in your bedroom. I threw that in too. It'll all be gone by tonight." Martha's protest died on her lips. She felt the familiar ache in her chest, a mix of anger, loss, and the sickening sense of being erased. Martha remembered, with a sudden pang, that the old chest wasn't empty. Hidden beneath a false bottom, wrapped in faded linens, were her late husband's war medals, the deed to the family's first cottage, and a collection of letters that spanned half a century. There were also small pouches of jewelry, nothing flashy, but priceless to Martha, who had planned to give them to her granddaughter one day. It was the kind of secret she and her husband had laughed about, never imagining anyone else would touch the chest. But now the chest, and all its secrets, were gone. Martha's mind raced. She called Tommy, who dismissed her worries with a sigh. "It's just old papers, Ma. I'll see if the dealer still has it, but I doubt he cares what's inside. If you wanted something, you should have told me." His indifference stung. Determined not to give up, Martha asked Eileen for help. Together, they set out to track down the dealer, a local antique shop owner named Mr. Fisher. The shop, cluttered with curiosities and shadowed with dust, was a world apart from Martha's now empty home. Mr. Fisher remembered the chest, his eyes lighting up. A fine piece. Already had some interest from collectors. Sold it quick, I'm afraid. Martha's heart sank. She pleaded for details, and after some coaxing, Mr. Fisher offered a name, a woman named Claudia who lived in the neighboring town. She had picked up the chest just that morning. Energized by desperation, Martha and Eileen borrowed Eileen's daughter's car and drove the winding country roads to Claudia's address. Claudia greeted them at her door, polite but wary. When Martha explained her plight, Claudia hesitated. "I haven't even opened it yet. I bought it for the woodwork. If there's something important, you'd better come in and see." Inside Claudia's sitting room, the chest sat in the center of the floor, its surface gleaming in the sunlight. Claudia fetched a screwdriver, and, with trembling hands, Martha showed her where to find the hidden compartment. The click of the false bottom echoed in the quiet room, and when Claudia lifted the lid, she gasped. "My word, there's a whole trove in here." Martha felt tears prick her eyes as she gathered the medals, the letters, and the jewelry, her past, restored by a stranger's kindness. Claudia insisted on returning the keepsakes, refusing any offer of payment. "Some things," she said softly, "aren't meant to be sold." Exhausted but relieved, Martha returned home, her arms filled with memories salvaged from loss. She knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time since Tommy started clearing out the house, she felt the spark of hope. Martha spent the next morning sitting at her kitchen table, the rescued treasures spread out before her like a patchwork of her life's greatest moments. She gently traced the edges of her late husband's war medals, reread the first letter he ever sent her, and polished the silver locket meant for her granddaughter. With every item she reclaimed, Martha felt a little more herself, a piece of her history no longer erased by haste or thoughtlessness. But relief soon gave way to anger. She replayed Tommy's dismissive words over and over, her hands tightening into fists. He'd called her past clutter, her memories junk. He hadn't even asked if she wanted to keep anything before selling off her belongings. For years, Martha had tried to believe Tommy's brusqueness was just stress or busyness. Now, she realized, it was something deeper, a growing sense of entitlement, an unwillingness to see her as anything more than an old woman in the way. Eileen, ever loyal, insisted on spending the day with Martha. They drank tea, sorted through the old photographs, and plotted their next moves. "You have to talk to him," Eileen said. "Make him see what he's done." Martha nodded, fear and frustration mingling in her chest. She'd always been proud of her independence, her ability to weather storms, but this felt different, like a challenge to her very dignity. That afternoon, Tommy dropped by, whistling as he counted bills in his hand. "Ma, I told you, got a good price for that stuff. Maybe now we can get you moved into somewhere safer. Less for you to worry about." He stopped short when he saw the medals and letters on the table. "How did you get those?" he asked, voice sharp with suspicion. Martha looked him straight in the eye, her voice calm but unwavering. "I went and got them myself. They were hidden in that chest you sold." Tommy shrugged, not meeting her gaze. "Well, you should have said something if you wanted to keep stuff. I was just trying to help." Martha's patience snapped. "You didn't ask, Tommy. You didn't listen. You decided for me, like I was a piece of furniture myself." Tommy flushed, muttering, "I just thought." "You didn't think at all," Martha interrupted. "Those things are my life, not your property. I won't have you treating me like I don't matter." The confrontation left the kitchen heavy with silence. Tommy, defensive and embarrassed, retreated to the hallway, pretending to check his phone. Eileen glared at him before whispering to Martha, "You did the right thing, love." The next few days were tense. Tommy called less, sending curt texts about practicalities, doctor's appointments, bills, groceries. Martha responded when she had to, but otherwise poured her energy into reclaiming what she could. She rearranged her parlor with a few remaining pieces of furniture, hung her favorite photos where the sun would catch them, and even bought herself a new rocking chair, a small act of defiance, but a meaningful one. Word spread among the neighbors. Some expressed quiet sympathy, others shared their own stories of children who had swept through their parents' homes, tossing away heirlooms without a thought. Martha found comfort in these stories, realizing she wasn't alone. At church, several women stopped her after the service, offering support and hugs. One even invited her to join a group of history keepers, seniors committed to preserving family stories and treasures. Martha took to writing her memories down, filling pages with stories for her granddaughter, determined that the next generation would understand the value of what came before. She joined the history keepers, meeting weekly to share tales and tea, and found new friendships blossoming out of shared loss. Meanwhile, Tommy's attitude soured. He resented Martha's refusal to move on, complaining to his friends that she was being stubborn and ungrateful. But when his own daughter, Hannah, came to visit and asked about the medals and letters, Martha sat her down and explained their meaning. Hannah listened wide-eyed, touched each keepsake gently, and hugged her grandmother tight. "Can I help you write more stories, Grandma?" Hannah asked. Martha smiled for the first time in days. "Of course, darling. I want you to know all of them." As autumn deepened, Martha felt a new sense of purpose. Her home was smaller, emptier, but it was hers, and within its walls, her legacy endured. As the leaves began to turn gold and red, Martha settled into a new routine. Each week, she met with the history keepers at the community center, a lively circle of elders armed with old photographs, faded recipes, and laughter that echoed down the halls. They swapped tales of weddings, wars, and wild family legends. Martha, once hesitant, found her voice. She read her stories aloud, about her first Christmas with her husband, about the night Tommy was born, about the storm that nearly took their old roof, and the group responded with applause, requests for more, and, sometimes, tears. Her granddaughter Hannah became her partner in these projects. Every Saturday, she'd come over with a notebook, ready to scribble down new anecdotes or help Martha organize shoeboxes full of letters and trinkets. Hannah was a patient listener and a sharp-eyed observer. She asked questions that made Martha laugh. Did Grandpa really get stuck on the church roof? And sometimes questions that made her ache. Why doesn't Dad want you to keep these things? Martha answered honestly. Sometimes, people are afraid to hold on to the past. They think it's easier to start fresh than to remember. She squeezed Hannah's hand. But our memories are what make us who we are. Someday, you'll be glad to have these stories. Meanwhile, Tommy's visits grew rare. He busied himself with work and home repairs, his tone curt in every conversation. When he did stop by, he rarely lingered, always in a rush to check off a list of errands. Yet one Sunday, as he stood in Martha's kitchen fixing a leaky faucet, Hannah surprised him by pulling out her new family history notebook. "Did you know Grandma kept all of Grandpa's letters from when he was overseas?" she asked, eyes bright. "She even found medals and pictures you'd never seen." Tommy looked up, surprised. For a moment, his annoyance faded. "I didn't know that." He glanced at Martha, then quickly looked away. Hannah pressed on. "You should read some of them. There's a story about the time you won the school spelling bee and didn't tell anyone until the trophy came in the mail." Martha smiled. "You were always full of surprises." Tommy grunted, half embarrassed and half amused. "I barely remember that." But he agreed to read a few pages, and for the first time in months, the three of them sat together at the table, sharing memories as the kettle whistled in the background. Encouraged by her progress with Hannah, Martha threw herself into community life. She helped the history keepers organize a memory fair, an event for families to bring in their own treasures and learn how to record and preserve their stories. The day was a huge success. Martha displayed her husband's medals, the locket, and a selection of her best stories. People crowded around, listening as she recounted how her family came to settle in the town and the little secrets each piece of furniture once held. At the fair, Martha met a local journalist who was fascinated by her story of the hidden chest and the brush with losing it all. The journalist interviewed Martha for a feature in the town's newspaper. The article ran with the headline, "History Lost and Found: How One Grandmother Saved Her Family's Story." Martha received calls and letters from strangers who thanked her for sharing her tale and reminded her that she was far from alone in her struggle. The publicity stirred new feelings in Tommy. At first, he was embarrassed that the family's dirty laundry was now public, but he couldn't deny the pride he felt reading about his mother's resilience. Hannah teased him about his sudden celebrity, and for the first time, Tommy joined in the laughter. As the season deepened, Martha's home, though emptier of furniture, filled up again, with neighbors dropping by, with Hannah's questions, with invitations to speak at schools and church groups. She began to believe that her voice, her memories, were worth more than any old oak chest could ever hold. One evening, as she sat with Hannah by the window, Martha whispered, "We can lose things, darling. But what matters most, if we fight for it, will always find its way home." As October's winds swept the last leaves from the trees, Martha's home had never felt so alive. She discovered a deep well of resilience and purpose, and her connection with Hannah grew stronger with every passing day. Together, they started a scrapbook, part family tree, part treasure map, filled with old photographs, snippets of letters, and stories carefully typed out on Martha's old typewriter. Hannah's visits became the highlight of Martha's week. After school, she'd arrive with her backpack, a treat from the bakery, and a new question for her grandmother: "What was your happiest day? Did you ever want to run away? What did Dad do to get grounded when he was little?" Martha answered each question with a twinkle in her eye and an honesty that drew Hannah closer. One afternoon, as rain tapped against the windows, Martha decided it was time to show Hannah the family's most precious heirloom, a silver locket that had belonged to Martha's own mother. She pressed the locket into Hannah's palm and explained how it had survived war, loss, and countless moves, always finding its way back to the women in their family. Hannah's eyes shone with awe as she fastened it around her neck. Meanwhile, Tommy's distance grew increasingly awkward. He avoided Martha's house when he knew Hannah would be there, and his phone calls were short and businesslike. But something began to shift after he read the newspaper article about Martha's story. At work, colleagues complimented him on his famous mother. One even asked if he had any of his own stories to share, and Tommy, for the first time, hesitated before brushing off the question. Pressure from the community made Tommy rethink his actions. At the grocery store, Mrs. Patterson from the church stopped him. "Your mother's done something wonderful, you know. Not everyone gets a second chance to save what matters." Tommy mumbled his thanks, the words lingering long after he'd left the store. Back at home, Martha threw herself into new projects. She joined the local school's Living History Day, sharing stories with students and encouraging them to interview their own grandparents. Her home became a drop-in center for curious children and grateful parents, all eager to learn the value of their own family histories. Eileen, ever supportive, organized a neighborhood potluck to celebrate Martha's newfound fame. The living room filled with laughter and the aroma of home-cooked dishes. Neighbors brought old photographs, and the evening turned into a spontaneous storytelling session. Even Tommy showed up, drawn by curiosity and a desire to reconnect, if only for a night. During the potluck, Hannah presented Martha with a surprise: the completed scrapbook, beautifully decorated and carefully organized. The room grew quiet as Hannah explained how every page told not just Martha's story, but their whole family's journey. She spoke about the lost chest, the rediscovered treasures, and the importance of never letting go of what matters most. Moved by her granddaughter's words, Martha stood to thank her friends and family. "I lost so much," she said softly, "but I gained something greater, reminders that our stories live on as long as we share them." She looked at Tommy, whose eyes met hers for the first time in weeks. He gave a hesitant nod, a silent promise that he was listening. After the party, Tommy lingered. He helped clear dishes, then asked to see the scrapbook. The two of them sat side by side on the sofa, paging through the book in companionable silence. For the first time, Tommy asked questions, about his father's medals, about the letters, about the locket now hanging around Hannah's neck. As night fell, Tommy apologized. "I didn't realize how much those things meant to you, Ma. I was just trying to fix things my way." Martha squeezed his hand, forgiveness easy now that she saw the spark of understanding in his eyes. "You can't fix everything, Tommy. But you can learn. And that means more to me than anything you could ever buy or sell." As the wind howled outside, Martha knew that, despite loss, despite hurt, her family was finding its way back to what truly mattered. The first frost of November painted Martha's windows with silver, but inside her home, warmth blossomed in every corner. Hannah visited often, sometimes bringing friends who wanted to hear Martha's stories firsthand. They sat cross-legged on the rug, wide-eyed as Martha described her childhood adventures or the daring escapades of her late husband. The scrapbook grew heavier with each visit, swelling with new photos, notes, and drawings, a living testament to a family's journey. Inspired by Martha's example, several neighbors launched their own family history projects. The community center buzzed with storytelling workshops and intergenerational tea parties. Martha was asked to lead a session called Finding Home in Old Things, where she taught others to look for meaning in forgotten objects, to ask questions before clearing out attics or basements. She was moved to tears when a young mother showed her a faded quilt, now cherished because of a story unearthed through Martha's gentle encouragement. Meanwhile, Tommy's presence slowly returned to Martha's life. He called before visiting now, and each time he came, he lingered a bit longer. One Saturday morning, he arrived with a battered cardboard box. "Found these in the garage," he said, his voice uncertain. "Thought you might want to see if there's anything worth saving." Together, they sorted through old tools, newspaper clippings, and a bundle of birthday cards. Martha found a pressed flower from her wedding bouquet, tucked inside a book she'd thought long gone. Tommy smiled, sheepish, as Martha thanked him. "I'm starting to see what you mean, Ma. These aren't just things. Their conversations deepened." Martha shared stories she'd never told before, of heartbreak and perseverance, of tiny victories that shaped their family's spirit. Tommy listened, sometimes laughing, sometimes wiping away a tear. For the first time in years, he began to ask for advice, no longer the know-it-all son but a man finally ready to learn from his mother's wisdom. Thanksgiving arrived with the smell of roasting turkey and the laughter of reunited family. Martha set the table with the remaining pieces of her favorite china, Hannah placing handwritten place cards at each setting. Tommy carved the turkey while Eileen led a toast, thanking Martha for teaching them the true meaning of home. As the family shared stories around the table, Hannah spoke about the lessons she'd learned, how value wasn't always measured in money or convenience, but in memory and love. Tommy added his own reflection, admitting that he'd been too quick to clear away the past, blind to the invisible threads that held their family together. The evening was filled with music and warmth, and after dessert, Tommy helped Martha bring down a dusty suitcase from the closet. Inside were old Christmas ornaments, each with a story. The family gathered around, hanging them on the tree as Martha recounted the memories attached to each one. Later that night, after everyone had gone, Martha sat by the window, watching snow begin to fall. She realized that the greatest treasure she'd recovered wasn't hidden in furniture or letters. It was the renewed bond with her son, the wonder in her granddaughter's eyes, and the living history they were creating together. In her journal, she wrote, "Love is what's hidden in the spaces between us, waiting to be found if we're willing to look." As December's cold settled in, Martha's home became a haven for stories and laughter. With the holidays approaching, she hosted more gatherings. Neighbors, friends from the History Keepers, and even teachers from the local school stopped by to share tea, swap recipes, and listen to Martha's tales. The scrapbook now occupied a place of honor on her coffee table, always ready for an impromptu story session. The community's appreciation for Martha deepened. The local library invited her to give a talk about family treasures, and her words resonated with a packed audience. People brought in everything from antique tools to love letters, seeking Martha's advice on how to preserve their stories. She encouraged each person to see their heirlooms not just as possessions, but as vessels for memories, worthy of respect and conversation. One snowy Saturday, Tommy came over with Hannah in tow. The three of them baked cookies, the kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon and the sound of Hannah's laughter. Tommy, more relaxed than Martha could remember, told stories of his own childhood, about the time he snuck cookies before dinner or how he'd gotten stuck in the backyard apple tree. Hannah listened, wide-eyed, scribbling notes to add to their ever-growing scrapbook. That afternoon, a letter arrived from the local newspaper. Martha's story had been nominated for a Community Spirit Award, recognizing her efforts to inspire others to protect their family histories. The announcement stirred excitement in the neighborhood. Eileen organized a surprise gathering at the community center to celebrate Martha's nomination. Friends and neighbors brought small mementos, photos, trinkets, and written stories, adding them to a communal memory wall in Martha's honor. At the event, the mayor gave a short speech about the importance of remembering where we come from. Hannah stood by Martha's side, her voice steady as she introduced her grandmother to the crowd. "Grandma taught me that the most valuable things are the memories we keep and the stories we share. She helped us find our family again." Tommy, moved by the moment, publicly apologized for his earlier actions. "I made mistakes," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I thought I was helping, but I didn't listen. I'm grateful Mom forgave me, and I'm proud to be her son." The audience applauded, many wiping away tears. Back home, Martha felt a weight had lifted. The bitterness she'd carried since the loss of her furniture was replaced by a sense of peace. She and Tommy spent hours sorting old photos and reorganizing the house, not to clear it out, but to give every precious thing a place of honor. Hannah took photos of the objects, uploading them to a digital album so their stories would never be lost again. The family began a new tradition: Sunday evenings spent together, sharing stories and lessons from the past week. Sometimes Eileen joined, sometimes neighbors, and always there was food, laughter, and the steady hum of belonging. Martha saw how far Tommy had come. He was slower now to judge, quicker to ask questions, and always eager to hear another tale. As Christmas drew near, Martha and Hannah worked on a special project, a collection of their favorite family stories, printed and bound to give to friends and relatives. On Christmas Eve, Tommy presented Martha with a hand-carved wooden box, inscribed with the words, "For what matters most." Inside were letters from him and Hannah, promising to keep the family's stories alive. That night, Martha sat by the fire, surrounded by her family and friends. She looked at the faces glowing in the candlelight, at the ornaments on the tree and the scrapbook on the table, and knew that nothing truly precious was ever lost, only waiting to be found and cherished once more. The start of the new year brought fresh snow and the promise of new beginnings. Martha's Community Spirit Award was announced in the local paper, her photograph, smiling, surrounded by Hannah and Tommy, proudly displayed above an article detailing her efforts to preserve family histories. Neighbors and strangers alike congratulated her at the market, the pharmacy, and even on her daily walks. The recognition filled Martha with gratitude, but what mattered most was how her story had inspired others to look more closely at their own family's pasts. Hannah, emboldened by her grandmother's example, started a history club at school. She recruited classmates to interview their relatives, collect old photographs, and create family trees. The project caught the attention of teachers, who invited Martha to speak to the class. She arrived with a box of keepsakes, sharing stories and answering eager questions about the old days. The children listened in rapt attention, many later sharing what they'd learned with their parents. Tommy became a regular at Martha's Sunday story nights. He brought old friends from high school, who reminisced about neighborhood pranks and summer adventures. The house was alive with laughter, stories crisscrossing generations. Tommy's transformation did not go unnoticed. He asked more questions, cherished the memories Martha and Hannah offered, and sometimes even arrived early to help with chores or cook supper. As spring approached, Martha received a letter from a distant cousin, inspired by the news story, who shared a trove of family photographs and documents long thought lost. With Hannah's help, Martha painstakingly catalogued the new treasures, weaving them into their ever-expanding scrapbook. Together, they pieced together tales of ancestors who had crossed oceans, started businesses, and survived hardship with courage and hope. At the community center, Martha's storytelling sessions grew in popularity. She helped organize a town history day, inviting families to bring in heirlooms and swap stories. Tommy and Hannah set up a display of their scrapbook and treasures, answering questions and guiding other families through the process of preserving their own legacies. One evening, after a particularly lively gathering, Tommy lingered as Hannah and Martha finished the dishes. He turned to his mother, his voice gentle. "I never realized how much I missed, Ma. Thank you for making sure none of it disappeared." Martha smiled, her heart full. "It's never too late, Tommy. What matters is what we do with what we have now." The seasons shifted, and the Sunday gatherings became a cherished ritual. Sometimes neighbors joined, sometimes just family, but always there was warmth and welcome. Eileen brought her own grandchildren to listen, and soon the house was filled with the sound of stories, old ones, new ones, and those just waiting to be written. As dusk fell on one of these evenings, Martha looked around her living room, once stripped bare, now alive with laughter, photos, and the steady hum of connection. She realized the true treasure she had fought to reclaim was not hidden in furniture or boxes, but in the living bonds of love, memory, and the stories passed from one generation to the next. Spring's arrival brought a burst of color to Martha's small garden. Tulips, daffodils, and a stubborn rosebush she and Hannah had nursed through winter's chill. The sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as Martha prepared for a very special Sunday gathering. The entire family, plus neighbors and new friends from the History Keepers group, would be coming for a potluck and a celebration. The reason? Martha's story had not only won her the Community Spirit Award, but it also inspired the local library to create a permanent family memory collection, a place for townspeople to deposit copies of letters, photos, and keepsakes, ensuring that no one's history would ever be lost again. Martha was asked to cut the ribbon and donate the first scrapbook, a gesture that brought her both pride and humility. The afternoon was filled with food, music, and storytelling. Eileen recited a favorite childhood poem, Hannah's classmates displayed family trees, and Tommy grilled burgers in the backyard, joking with neighbors and sharing tales of mischief from his youth. Martha sat surrounded by children and adults alike, her lap full of photo albums and hands held by those who'd come to thank her for reminding them of what mattered. At the library's dedication ceremony, Hannah introduced her grandmother with a short speech. "Grandma taught me that history isn't just about dates and facts, it's about people and love and the small things we hold on to. She helped us find our story, so we'd never forget where we came from." The audience applauded as Martha cut the ribbon and handed over the scrapbook, her heart brimming with gratitude. As the sun set, Martha and Tommy lingered in the quiet library stacks, looking through old photos one last time before placing them in their new home. Tommy squeezed his mother's hand. "I never understood why you fought so hard for all this. But now I do. Thank you, Ma, for not letting us lose ourselves." Later, back at home, Martha found Hannah curled up in the armchair, locket glinting in the fading light. They talked quietly about dreams for the future, trips they might take, stories they still had to record, and the people they hoped would one day sit in the same living room, learning and laughing together. That night, as Martha finished her journal, she paused and looked around her home, a place stripped of many things, but overflowing with what mattered most. She wrote, "The things we lose teach us to treasure what we have. In the end, our real legacy is not hidden in drawers or chests, but in the memories we share, the love we pass on, and the courage to fight for what truly matters." As the first stars appeared outside her window, Martha smiled, knowing the story of her family, and her heart would never be lost again.